won again today. Well done, Pete. How did it go today?
Went pretty well. Better than anticipated, actually. We weren't so sure about the forecast. It was going to be blue, no cumulus conditions, which is actually what we eventuated. But it was stronger climbs than we thought, much stronger than we thought they were going to be. And generally, the task went fantastically. Yeah.
So you didn't have any problems getting out on track into with the tailwind?
No, well, the tailwind is always an advantage. We had like a 25, I saw 29 kilometres an hour tailwind for some of it, but 25 kilometres an hour for some of it, and that really does help with that. But also on the first leg, we had pretty well went round most of the first leg as one gaggle. So the speeds actually weren't that high, because when you're actually in a gaggle and everybody's together, you only have to beat the person that's next to you. You're not trying to beat the clock. So you might have, anybody watching the tracking would have realised that our speeds were, for the first 30 kilometres, were actually very slow, because it actually doesn't matter tactically. And leading out from the top of a gaggle is not necessarily the best thing to do. So a few of us were just hanging around the top, waiting for somebody to actually lead out, and then we'd pounce on them, of course, as soon as they did that. So yeah, kind of tactically interesting. And then once we got further down the first leg, we spread out a little bit. I found myself up front and basically stayed there for the rest of the flight after that. I was just watching on the because I can see the tracking. I've got it on my UDN, because I could watch all the other gliders, what they were climbing in, how far back they were. They were just coming in behind, and sometimes getting very, very close. Sometimes in the same climb, sometimes not. But I managed to stay ahead of them. And
then you had the crosswind leg, which was only 30 kilometres. And you were all pretty much still together then?
Yeah, I was leading out there, but we weren't. There was only a few kilometres along that leg. That is a challenging leg. Any time where you're transitioning from, well, basically the higher ground to the flatter ground to the west, and going over some hills in the middle. I kind of anticipated before we took off that might be a difficult crossing through there, and it turns out to be exactly that. So when we're going into the third turn, which was Yakka, long glide there down to not all that high above the ground actually. We weren't desperately low, but I pushed on ahead and found, I can't remember, 6-7 knots, so I was quite happy with that. Get back up again. And the leg from there, actually, that whole next leg, I mean, the task was set to hopefully take advantage of a convergence between the sea breeze and the southeasterly wind. And we weren't quite under that convergence, and there were no cumulus clouds marking it anyway, so it was hard to see where it was. It was a little bit further to the west of where we were, but we were close enough to get good air down there, so which helped, because we were pushing into a headwind, of course, on that leg, so that pushed the speeds up a bit.
Yeah, because you were quite west of track, in fact, on that leg.
Yeah, and that was intentional. I mean, in fact, there were some cumulus clouds. We never really got under them. We could see where the convergence was, and also that matched what SkySight was forecasting where it would be. But it was a pretty big deviation off track to go over there, and I don't think anybody actually did. But we all deviated a little bit to the west just to get closer to that line of queues, and I think that did make a difference. I did hear that Dave Peach went on more on-track route and not so far west, and I think his run might have been a bit slower, but maybe there wasn't much in it.
Well, he was behind you all anyway at that stage.
Yeah.
And so in a way, I assumed that he didn't have much to lose by heading, saving a few kilometres by heading back on track.
Well, if you're behind, you can't win, of course, by doing the same as everybody else. So a perfectly sensible solution is to actually do something completely different, fly over the hills, and it might have worked, and in this case it didn't, but you certainly can't beat them by doing the same thing. And
then from the control point, just a straight on your own run home?
Yeah, well, actually from before the control point, I had probably a marginal glide. On the numbers, I might have made it in, and this is about 30 kilometres out, just before the control point, and I stumbled into 7.5 knots. And it only takes a couple of turns in that. I might have done 3 turns in it, and you're miles above glide. But it's a Grand Prix, so actually the speed you finish at doesn't matter as long as you finish against the next place setter. So I just made sure I had an easy glide, because I could see them a few kilometres back, and left that 7.5 knot climb, or 3.5 metres per second, so it's a pretty strong climb. And then just roared home from there. Magic. A lot of fun.
Okay, well done, Pete Temple.
Thank you.